Welcome inside another episode of the Red Mile Rundown. Pleased to be with you this week. We've had a great week around Flames hockey, a fun, interesting, not fun, an interesting road trip for the Flames. But good to be back with you here on the Red Mile Rundown, episode 18 here. Want to take a quick second here to thank everyone out there for the likes, the downloads, the listens. Second best week number-wise for us here on the podcast. We're pretty jacked up about those numbers. I am Johnny Stope, the host of the Red Mile Rundown. Alongside me, as always, my co-host, Robert Munich. How we doing, Robert? How has the weekend been for you?
Things are going pretty good, and just happy the fact that Dustin Wolf is a Calgary Flame. He was incredible on Saturday. God, this franchise is lucky to have him.
No kidding. Absolutely incredible game for him on the weekend versus the Winnipeg Jets. Lots to get into this week on the Red Mile Rundown here with you, Robert. We wanted to start with a little bit of a different topic. Normally we talk about the week that was and our reactions to the games here, but we're going to cut that kind of stuff out this week and let's focus on some other topics. You sent me a great list of things that were on your mind and as we were chit-chatting here for the podcast. Croag Conroy and his tenure with the Calgary Flames is where we should start this week. Why don't you kick us off here, Robert? Your thoughts on Croag Conroy and what you're thinking here with this topic?
Well, I mean, we're at that point of the season where we're like halfway through and we're approaching the trade deadline here, and we're starting to have some of those more philosophical conversations on the future of the team. And like I know in today's episode of Barn Burner, they had a really good debate about that kind of stuff, and kind of just like inspired me to want to talk about it too with you, John. And the one thing I wanted to bring up that I don't think like a ton of people are really talking about is just the job Croag Conroy's done, and then where he's heading with this team in terms of his philosophy on team building. And this is just me, and I'd be interesting to get your perspective on it too. But are you at all worried about Croag Conroy moving forward as GM? Or the one thing that kind of stands out to me is it feels like the players are making a lot of the decisions for him rather than Croag himself making decisions and going with a plan that he creates. It almost feels like he doesn't have a plan. His plan is to keep everybody, but if the players don't want to stay, then he just ends up trading them. Like, to me, that doesn't really feel like a concrete plan moving forward. I'd be curious to get your opinion on that. Have you been pretty happy with the job Croag Conroy's done? Are there any warning signs to you about, maybe this ending up going in the wrong direction? How are you feeling about Croag Conroy?
That's a really, really interesting question because you can go a lot of ways with the answer here. Overall, I've liked what he's done with the job. There are certain things that he's had to have done. Like we look at last season, he had to do a few of those moves and he got the job done. But you look at it and you take it from the 80-foot view, you back off and you look hindsight 2020, and it kind of seems like he's trying to serve two things at one time. He's trying to serve what Murray Edwards and the ownership group want from him, but at the same time, almost like you said, letting the players dictate whether they're moved or not. I think there is something that is there with people are like, well, he wants to be in Calgary, you have to sign him, or he doesn't want to be here, you have to move him. And I think he's trying to serve that as well. So trying to do two things at once almost. I think he has a plan in place here, but I'm not sure he's being allowed, whether it's by the players, by the owner, to actually execute his plan. It's almost like, and this is not a slight on Croag Conroy, it's almost like he's too nice. And he's being too nice to everybody. Being a general manager in the National Hockey League, you got to kind of make those tough decisions every once in a while. You look at both the general managers that have worked for Vegas, how cutthroat they've been. That's maybe too far the other direction. But sometimes you've got to make a tough decision. Sometimes you've got to make that decision. And I just don't know if Croag Conroy is doing that. I overall like what he's done so far, but going forward here, he's got to find that line where he's like, no, we can't just keep doing the same old and expect something different. And so that's where I think where he's going to have to make his teeth now is what kind of general manager are you going to be here? It's time for him to make that decision.
Yeah, I like the way you put that, and kind of I think the way I see it is in a vacuum, I think he's done a really good job. Yeah. Like when you take all context out of the decisions he's made, I think he's done a nice job so far. But when you do take into consideration the context behind some of those decisions, I start to have some serious questions. And like, here's just a couple examples. So like dating back to last season, if it were up to Croag Conroy, Elias Lindholm would have signed an 8-year deal, pushing $9 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Tanev would have been re-signed. Noah
Mhm.
Hanifin would have been re-signed. If it's up to Croag Conroy now, Rasmus Andersson would be signed to an 8-year contract. All of a sudden, you're locked into this really old, aging, expensive roster that is super mediocre. And like Croag Conroy, he's even admitted this in interviews before. Like he said, when he was working with Brian Burke, that Burke would always tell him, Craig, your biggest problem is that you love players, that you end up falling in love with your own guys. And as a general manager in the NHL, like you mentioned with Vegas, I think there's an element of being cutthroat that's super important to having success long term. Like you could even look at like the Florida Panthers, for example, with the Jonathan Huberdeau trade.
Mm-hmm.
Huberdeau was a long-term member of that team, beloved by the fan base, loved by his teammates. Same goes for Mackenzie Weegar. He had just kind of come on the last couple years in Florida. He'd been really good, became a fan favorite in that locker room. And Bill Zito, he trades them. He takes two of the most popular guys out of his room, two of his best players. He takes them out of the room, and he makes a big, bold trade for Matthew Tkachuk, and it's worked out brilliantly for them. I think Conroy's got to start taking more of that ruthless approach moving forward here. I don't like the idea that one, just because you want to stay means that we're going to sign you. I think that's concerning. Conroy's he's got to have a plan. He's got to stick to it. He can't just let Rasmus Andersson dictate which direction the team goes. He can't just let Yegor Sharangovich dictate the direction that the team's going to go. And I'm a little concerned about that aspect when it comes to Conroy. It seems like he loves his guys. He holds his guys in high regard. And that, like I said, that goes back to Elias Lindholm, Noah Hanifin, Chris Tanev last year. I don't know if I like that moving forward for the Flames. I really do hope that moving forward here, he does become a little more ruthless, practices a little bit more pragmatism in his decision-making. And I think what ends up happening with Rasmus Andersson here is going to show the fan base, whether or not he can be that ruthless GM. Because I really think, I don't know if you're in the same boat, I really think moving Rasmus Andersson is the smartest thing to do for this team. But Craig loves his guys. Craig's been around Rasmus Andersson's entire career. Can Craig let go? Can Craig say goodbye to Rasmus Andersson despite the fact he loves the player? I'm pretty skeptical of that. Like, is what I'm saying, is that fair? You think, is that fair criticism of Croag Conroy?
I think it's a very valid concern to have if you look at it from, you got to take your fanship and your bias out of it when you're looking at stuff like this as well, when you're talking about something like this. So it's a very valid concern when you look at it from the big picture. You saw that as well at the draft. Samuel Honzek was not the best guy on the board at the time that he was picked in the draft. He was Croag Conroy's guy that he wanted. And so at that pick, the Flames opted for Samuel Honzek over other guys that were on the board at the time. Hindsight's 2020. Maybe he turns out to be a really good hockey player down the road here. But you've got to be able to, when you're a general manager, separate what you love about a player, what you love, and how you would go about it on NHL 25 on your Xbox or whatever. You got to separate that and be, this is the business side of running a hockey team. You've got to look at what's best for business, and what best for business might not be what you personally would love to do. And when it comes down to a guy like Rasmus Andersson, it's a really hard conversation because Croag Conroy, you have to remember, going back to the days of the Abbotsford Heat, he was part of that group that helped run the Abbotsford Heat, run the Stockton Heat. He was part of all of that stuff, being assistant general manager. So he grew up with Rasmus Andersson in this organization. He saw Rasmus Andersson from draft day to what he is today. And so it is hard to let go of those guys when you're thinking of just man to man, friend to friend. When it comes down to being business general manager to player, you've got to separate that. And I'm not sure Croag Conroy, to what Brian Burke said about him, is capable of doing that all the time. And unfortunately, that might lead to a couple of bad contracts. That's the fear of mine, is that your personality and your personal relationship with a player is going to affect what you're trying to do as a hockey club. And they can't They can't coexist. You can't have both sides of both worlds. You have to be able to separate personal relationships and business relationships. And that's the line Craig Hunter's going to have to find here coming down here. You can't just sign Rasmus because he says he likes Calgary. That's just not a good way of going about it. If you're signing Rasmus because you believe he's the next captain of this team, he's the leader of this team, and you have another plan for these other aging players around him, and there's an actual physical plan there, then okay, go down that road, but make sure that's your plan and not because of your personal relationships. That's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean, totally bang on there. And like I said, like if it were up to Conroy, they'd have Huberdeau, Kadri, Uyghur, Anderson, Lindholm, Hannafin, Tanev, all signed to long-term deals. And I'm probably missing a couple guys. Sharon Govich is in there. Blake Coleman. So like that's a really old group of players. It's a really expensive group of players. And that's what he wanted. Like his original plan was, I want to sign these guys. And I think that's super concerning because if Craig Conroy couldn't take a step back and realize, hey, had I signed these guys, we would have been stuck with a lot of bad long-term contracts. We would have been old and we would have been super mediocre. I don't know how Craig Conroy could look at that situation with all those players signed and think to himself, wow, we got a contender here. So that makes me kind of question, his long-term vision for the team. And, with Rasmus Andersson here, it seems like it's just going to end up being another Noah Hannafin situation where Craig's just going to end up begging Rasmus Andersson to stay between July 1st and the 2026 trade deadline. He's going to throw a ton of money at him. He's going to throw no trade protection. And he's essentially going to beg Rasmus Andersson to remain a Calgary Flame because he wants to stop this narrative that no one wants to play in the city. Mm-hmm. And it's going to cost the Flames in the long run, in my opinion. And that same thing happened with Noah Hannafin. He begged Noah Hannafin to stay, threw a gross amount of money at him on an 8-year contract. And Hannafin said no at the very last second. All of a sudden, Craig's stuck there with 2 or 3 days before the trade deadline with an asset in Hannafin, and he's kind of dictating the whole situation. And the Flames weren't able to get as much for him as they probably could have had they traded him earlier.
Signing Rasmus Andersson long-term, for me, isn't the problem. It's fine. It is what it is. I think what's going to end up happening here is what this signifies to me is it feels like Rasmus Andersson is going to get all 8 years. He's going to get $10 million this season, full no-move protection, no trade protection, the whole 9 yards. And for me, doing that type of move is signaling that the plan that you had in place isn't actually the plan. We've been hearing about how the Flames want to get younger and more competitive, and they want to be in that mix of getting these kids into the lineup. Well, you sign this aging veteran, to an already aging core of Huberdeau and Uyghur and Kadri, is not signaling that to me. It's signaling we're okay with what we have, so let's just run it back and keep going again with the same group next year. That's what that long-term, all the money, all the trade protection signals to me is this plan actually isn't our plan. Our plan is actually just to run it back over and over and over. We got caught in that with Brad Treliving in 2015, 16, 17, where it was just running the same guys back because, well, we're good enough, right? We can make the playoffs with this group. If just making the playoffs, like what the Flames are attempting to do this year, is good enough, then Murray Edwards is always going to be happy with 9th spot because that's what this team is going to end up being like. So if you're going to sign Rasmus Andersson to that long-term deal, it's got to be a price and something that's going to help the Flames. It's got to have limited trade protection at max. It can't be for max dollars. It can't be for max years. If they came out and said Rasmus Andersson signed for 6 years at $8 million, fine, I can handle that kind of a contract. But when you have eight years, $10 million contract, all the trade protection, you're just rinsing and repeating what you've done decade after decade here. And that signals to me the Flames are just going to chase it again. And it's just going to be mediocrity, the mushy middle all over again. And every once in a while, we're going to catch a 2015 season where they win a lucky playoff round and then just get absolutely slam-basted by the Anaheim Ducks again. You've got to pick your time, Conroy, and you've got to pick the way to build your roster, and you've got to take your plan and stick to it. And you've got to be able to tell Murray Edwards, this is the plan that you okayed. We have to stick to it. And then on the flip side, you got to go to the players and be like, sorry, you don't fit the plan we have here. We have to move on. And that's where Croag Conroy can make what kind of a general manager he's going to be here. Because right now, it's hard to say which direction he's going to go with all of this.
Yeah. And like another thing that kind of sticks out to me too is I've heard a lot of people say that one of the biggest reasons why you want to sign Rasmus Andersson to a long-term deal is because you want to change the reputation around your team. And people are saying like imagine the signal it's going to send to the rest of the league and the franchise that a big time pending UFA wants to stay. Like that sends a great message. And I'm like, you can't be making 8-year decisions, right? Like you can't be making those 8-year long-term decisions based on you wanting to turn around your reputation. You know how you turn around your reputation? You build a legit contender through the draft, and you do a great job drafting and developing and building your team with its next core group of players. It's not going in the playoffs 1 year, out the next, out, losing the first round. That's not how you rebuild your culture and your reputation. And for Andersson specifically, to me, it feels like that decision is based a lot off his intangibles rather than on ice play, which is another thing that concerns me. Because like I wrote about it Flames Nation a few days ago saying that Rasmus Andersson's play has dropped off. And there's one paragraph here near the end of the article that I'll read out here because I thought I kind of summed it up in a pretty decent way. So I said, it feels like the Flames are making long-term decisions based on Andersson's intangibles over his on-ice results. The Flames love Andersson as a person, a leader, but I think the organization loves the idea that a high-profile pending UFA wants to stay in Calgary, and they'll do everything they can to keep him and change the narrative around the team, despite the fact that it might not be the best decision for future success of the Flames on the ice. And I think that kind of sums up what concerns me about Croag Conroy. It's he falls in love with his players. He wants to have a reputation that they're big-time UFAs want to stay, and he wants to send that message. And signing Rasmus Andersson to that 8-year deal, I don't think is going to accomplish those things the way he thinks it is. And I do think once the team is ready to turn a corner and become a contender in 3, 4, 5 years, however long it takes, Andersson's going to be at the point of his career where he's kind of on the downhill of his prime. And I don't think he's going to be the same player that he is today or even last year when he's 33, 34. So I just think that all that stuff just kind of adds up and makes me a little concerned with the direction Conroy's taking this team.
Signing one UFA that you drafted, that you developed, does not change the narrative around the Calgary Flames. The narrative around the Calgary Flames, around the league, from other fan bases are this is a mediocre franchise who can play some games and they're a soft out. That's what I see when I read Twitter or I'm on Threads or Blue Sky, whatever social media outlet you want to go on. Go read it. People don't think highly of the Flames because they're not a consistent winner.
They're kind of irrelevant around the NHL.
Yeah. They play right into that small market thing that irrelevant. People talk about other franchises much more than they talk about the Flames. They're ranked. They're right behind Ottawa in a lot of people's conversations about where you'd rather play in Canada. Like, it's not a desirable market because they continually spin their tires. So signing Rasmus Andersson is not going to change this narrative. You change this narrative, much like you said, Robert, you change this narrative by you draft players, you build a culture, and you build a culture that can be consistently winning. Not always going to win the Stanley Cup or go deep playoff run, but if you see a franchise that's consistently winning, it draws people. You look at a team like a Dallas Stars organization. They continually just trot out really good team after really good team. They can bring people in. They can sign guys. The Rangers, same thing. They sign guys. Yeah, Rangers are a big market too, but you look at these markets and they build a culture around winning. 5, 6, 7 years ago, nobody wanted to go play in Dallas. Now you got guys like Chris Tanev waiving no trade clauses to go play there for a playoff run because they see the culture there. So
same thing in Florida. So,
yeah,
sorry to interrupt.
exactly.
It's like when people always say that teams like Dallas and Florida, they have this huge advantage because they're tax free. Well, it's like for like decades, people didn't want to go there, and they were mediocre or bad hockey teams. But all of a sudden, they change the culture. They draft really well. They build a really good core group of players, and they start winning. Now people want to go there. It's a desirable 100%. Place to go. The same thing could happen in Calgary, especially with the new building opening. And I like the culture Conroy is building in the sense of positivity and it being a fun place to be. Like the Flames can just build a winner people will want to come here. People will want to stay.
And we're not saying that Conroy's a bad general manager, so we're going to get those comments. I'm sure we are. We're not saying Conroy's a bad general manager. What we're saying here is there's signs of just rinse and repeat that we saw under past general managers. And it's based on trying to serve two things at once. You can't do it. It's got to be a plan. So sign Rasmus Andersson if you want, but it's got to fit the plan. You've got to know that you have guys coming down the pipeline. You have to know where this team is at, and you have to be honest with yourself. This Flames team might slip themselves into that wild card 2. Well, wild card 2 is going to play the Vegas Golden Knights most likely, maybe the Winnipeg Jets. Do you think the Flames can walk in the 7-game series and have a chance at beating either of those teams in a 7-game set? Yes, the Flames just beat the Winnipeg Jets on the weekend with a really good goaltending performance from Dustin Wolf. But think of that over a 7-game series. You're going to get that all for all 7 games or 4 games, whatever it's going to be. It's you've got to be honest with yourself when you're building your team. And if you're signing a veteran like Rasmus Andersson, it's got to be on point with the rest of your plan. To sign him just to sign him, though, to try to change the narrative that no one wants to be in Calgary is complete hogwash. And I really hope that's not how Croag Conroy is actually thinking, because it goes beyond Rasmus Andersson for me as well. You have other big names out there. Blake Coleman has 2 years left on his deal. He fits that exact same mold for me. Michael Backlund's a UFA next year. Like, there are other guys that are right there in that same conversation as Rasmus Andersson. So you have to be able to make that decision. Do you move on from these guys? Do you keep these guys? And just to keep a guy to say, hey, look, guys, hey, NHL, this UFA stayed, so people do want to play here. It's absolute hogwash.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And like, another slight concern is because he ends up falling in love with these players, does he not take asset management seriously? Does he end up holding on to these veteran players for too long to the point where they're not worth anything anymore? And Blake Coleman's a good example of that. What are they going to do with Blake Coleman? Like, does Conroy love having Coleman there as a veteran presence and as a good player on the ice? Like, will he not even consider moving him over the next 2 years? And is it going to come to the point where he just ends up trading him when he's 35 years old as a pending UFA in a couple of years, and they don't get anything for him because Conroy he fell in love with the player? Like, I think that's something that's fair to bring up and be a little bit of a fair criticism of Conroy. Like what he does with guys like Coleman and Kadri and Anderson is going to be a really great indication of the future direction that he's going to take this team in.
If he's serious about getting younger and finding talent and putting young guys in the lineup, I think Blake Coleman is a better trade chip than Rasmus Andersson, because this is a guy who's won a couple Stanley Cups in a very important role for Tampa Bay. He's a guy who has 2 years left, so you can get 2 nice runs for you. Why not trade this guy and use those assets to help build your roster? Why not use a guy like Blake Coleman to go find that right-handed shot centerman that people are clamoring for, or Croag Conroy's been searching for, that we've been told in the market here? You have to be serious about your asset management when you're in that position as Croag Conroy. Does Blake Coleman make sense for 2 more years, or is he blocking, say, a guy, and just to pick a random name out of the hat, is he blocking a William Stromgren from coming to the National Hockey League and perfecting his craft to the National Hockey League? Is he blocking Samuel Honzik from taking that next step into the NHL? You have to be able to manage the expectations of the roster versus what you have on the roster versus where you're trying to go here. And it's not an easy job, but you have to be honest with yourself. And like we said earlier in the show here, you got to take your personal relationships away from the business side of it. You've got guys, Glenn Sather traded one of the best hockey players ever to play the hockey game just by taking his relationship with the player out of it. And he just went business wise. It was the worst trade he ever made. But, when you trade Wayne Gretzky,
maybe not a great example.
But that's what I use that example because that's a high profile player that had a high profile relationship with a high profile general manager, and he took the business side of it over top of the personal relationship. Now, you're going to make bad trades and good trades. All general managers do that, but it's just to say, make the move based on what's best for the Calgary Flames. And that might be trading Blake Coleman. That might be trading Rasmus Andersson. That might be giving Stromgren an opportunity to come to the National Hockey League. Or the other way might be, okay, let's trade player X and keep Rasmus Andersson because he fits more what we're trying to do. It can work both ways. Just don't keep a guy just to keep a guy. It just doesn't make sense to me ever.
Yeah, and then with Coleman, so there's that argument that you made about, could he
Yes.
be taking a spot of a younger guy in the lineup over the next few years? And then there's also, how would I describe it? There's also kind of the risk you run of trading him 3 years from now instead of this season, for example. So say you do end up finding a deal for Blake Coleman, you get back a second round pick and a prospect, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
You get that second round pick and a prospect in 2025. And then you can use the pick this year and then allow that prospect to grow. And then by the time 2027, 2028 rolls around, you might actually have a player that can enter your lineup when you're ready to contend. Whereas if you end up holding on to Blake Coleman until he's a pending UFA 2 or 3 years from now, all of a sudden that draft pick's now going to be used in 2028, and that prospect's now going to start to develop in 2028 rather than 2025. You're just 3 years back of where you should have been. If that makes sense. So that's another thing to consider too. And when it comes to Conroy too, another point I just want to make is I do think he's on the right track. If you take a look at some the young core of players the Flames have in the organization, it's solid right now. You have a stud goaltender in Dustin Wolf, which is arguably the most important position that you can have in hockey. Mm-hmm. On the back end, you have a guy like Kevin Ball, who's probably going to sign a long-term deal this summer. He's only 24 years old. Then you got Parekh, Brustevich, Muse, Morin, Grushnikov, Poirier, Solovyov, Kuznetsov. You got to think at least 2 or 3 of those guys are going to become full-time NHLers at some point. Mm-hmm. And then up front, you got Connor Zary, looks like he could be a second-line center. Matt Coronado looks like he could be a 25, 35-goal guy. And then you got a whole bunch of lottery tickets in Peltier, Kerins, Honzig, Gridden, Stromgren, Sunia, Battaglia, Basha, Misa. It's a really solid start to the rebuild. That's a really solid group of players that you can start to build around. Just the key is they got to keep adding to it. They have to keep adding to it. They cannot take a step back and say, we're ready to go with just this group. They got to add more top 10 picks to that. They got to add more first and second round picks to that. And they just got to keep building, keep growing. Like I said, listing off those players, would you agree that they're on the right path? They have a solid group there to start building around. They need to add some more elite talent to that group.
Yeah, you just said it right there. That was my point. That's a great group, a great start, a great building step for this Calgary Flames team, a good foundation, I guess is the word to use there. What that one group is missing, and all due respect to those players, is there's only 1, maybe 2 guys in that entire group that you would call elite skill or high-end skill. That's a lot of guys that if they pan out to their max potential, you're looking at a really good second line players, maybe a first line player in there, some really good middle of defensemen. And that's no shame. That's awesome. You need those players. What you're missing there, and what you see from a lot of teams like Colorado has or Florida has, is those elite skilled guys. And you only get those elite skilled guys one of 2 ways. You send your whole entire organization to one spot for one player, or you draft those guys high in the draft. And so to keep your eye on the prize here, I'm not calling for the Flames to tank. What I'm calling for them to do is stick to your plan, develop your players, continually you're going to have some higher draft picks, just how it's going to be when you stick to your guns here and develop these players here. So you need your elite skill to add to this group. It's a great start by Croag Conroy. I'm always scared, and I've said this on past podcast episodes. Don't chase it based on a couple of months of success. We're 44 games into the season, and the Flames are in a wild card spot. That's great. Don't just go chasing it because you saw a little bit of success above your expectations.
Yeah, and
develop these guys.
Why are they in a wild card spot?
Dustin Wolf.
It's not because you have a good team. It's because you have a good goalie. And I know that's great. Goalie's part of a team too, and it's arguably the most important position in hockey. At the same time, though, you have to be able to build around that franchise goalie, and they just haven't done that yet. They're not at that point yet where they've built a good team. Because we've talked about a whole bunch in the past year. Since October 14th, the Flames are dead last in goals scored. I believe they still haven't scored 100 goals since then. They're the only team that hasn't scored 100 goals since October 14th. They defend kind of middle of the pack, I would say. They're in that kind of 20 to 15 range in terms of how they defend. But they have like a top 5 goalie in the NHL right now that's single-handedly keeping it in it. So like you said, like stick to the plan. Just because you have a good goalie doesn't mean that it automatically means you're going to win games. If the Flames end up taking that approach to their team building, saying, hey, we got a goalie, it's time to go, they're just going to end up being the Calgary Flames from 2005 to 2013 when they had Mika Kiprusoff, where they would just continually trade draft picks, bring in veterans, and they'd make the playoffs every now and then, and they'd lose in the first round because they had a goalie, but they didn't have a good team around that goalie. And I worry that if the Flames go down this direction saying, hey, we got Wolf, we're good to go, that we're just going to end up being that team that makes the playoffs, misses the playoffs, makes the playoffs, misses the playoffs, losing the first round. Don't ever go on a long run because you just don't have the team around Dustin Wolf. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No, I don't want to diminish anything Dustin Wolf has done because it's been remarkable. It's been fun to watch. It's been a really good story for the Calgary Flames. He's earned every second of what he's got here for the Flames. He doesn't stop working, and he continually works better. He's been getting better on the road, which was the weak point of his season thus far, and he's beginning slowly getting better. Normally, when you're building a team like this, though, the goaltender is one of the last pieces to hit when you're building a roster, and it just so happens the Flames have the goaltending hitting first. It's the first thing to hit, and that can give you a false sense of security. That's why we have the talk of Flames are a playoff team, is because Dustin Wolf has hit. But what he's doing right now is he's masking a lot of the problems of this roster. The lack of goal scoring, the lack of a good penalty kill, the lack of a consistent power play. He's masking a lot of this stuff for the Calgary Flames. And so we're seeing a lot of results from this Flames team based off the play of one guy. He stole that game in Winnipeg for anyone who watched it on Saturday. There is no way you play that game again, the Flames win that hockey game the way that they played in front of Dustin Wolf. He is the sole reason they got 2 points. And that could give you the false sense of security. You mentioned that barn burner debate that they had with Frank Saravelli and Ryan Pinder going back and forth. And that was Frank's entire point was they've got a goalie. It's time to go. Well, hold on. I more agree with what Ryan Pinder was saying, where it's like they've got a goaltender. Check. Next on the list, some more scoring. That's what's next on the list because they have defensive prospects coming. How are we going to score goals now? You can't rush these things. And when you rush these things, you do turn into the Buffalo Sabres. You do turn into the Edmonton Oilers before McDavid. You do
New York Islanders.
The Islanders, the Chicago Blackhawks before they got Bedard. You do turn into those things because you've mismanaged it. Not because rebuilds don't work. It's because the management of those rebuilds didn't work. When you do it properly, you get the Colorado Avalanche situations. You get the Florida Panthers situation once they figured out they have no taxes in that state. You get the Dallas Stars situation. You draft, you develop situations. So just because one part of your rebuild is hit or one part of your retool has hit, i.e. Dustin Wolf, doesn't mean it's over. It just means that's the first check mark on your list of to-do here. You got to go to the next thing to check that off. And for me, in the Flames, that's scoring.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add to the conversation after that. It's to me, it's pretty clear the direction they need to go. They need to just continue doing what they're doing. Conroy's done a good job so far building up the prospect system. Like you look at guys like Suniev is having a phenomenal year at UMass. Like I bet you they're going to sign him at the end of the year. I could see him being an NHLer. Stromgren continues to develop. Matvei Gridin, is exploding in the QMJHL. Battaglia, Misa, Perek, like Henry Muse, all these guys are looking phenomenal, and they've added a lot of depth to the Flames organizational cupboards.
Mm-hmm.
Keep doing that. Like I was listening to Overtime the other day on 960, and they had that caller Robert. I don't know. Are you familiar with Robert?
I am, yes.
He was very passionate in his latest call, and he kept saying picks. Like we need picks, and I'm like, effing rights, Robert. God damn it, we need draft picks. I couldn't agree more with him.
Development is going to be key no matter what the Flames think here. If they try to rush this rebuild, it's not going to work. If they try to mask it with veterans, it's not going to work. You have to have the development in place. Draft your players. I said this to you before we got on the show here. This is how I think of a rebuild. You draft and develop your team and you supplement it with trades, not the other way around. And if you do it the other way around, it's not going to work. If you mask it with trades and free agent signings, it's not going to work. You have to draft and develop your guys to be in a position to supplement them in with the one piece you're missing. And that's just hopefully how the Flames are looking at it, and how Croag Conroy is approaching these veterans that are going to be up for renewal soon as UFAs. The Rasmus Andersons, the Blake Colemans, those kind of guys. How he approaches that is going to tell you a lot about how he's going to build this roster. If he just re-signs Anderson and then re-signs Blake Coleman and then re-signs Michael Backlund, I don't care what he did last year anymore. It's all just rinse and repeat again for me, and it's just mediocrity. And no disrespect to those players, you don't want that here. You're ready to move on to the next phase if you are the Calgary Flames. That's just how it is for me. And I know you see it very similar to what I do. If you have nothing else to add to that, Robert, let's move on to talk a little something else on the Flames. Do you have anything else to add to that Croag Conroy conversation?
No, I think we touched on everything there, but that was a great discussion, and I hope everybody listening enjoyed it too, because I know I personally love these deep dives on like the macro view of the Calgary Flames. I always think it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, me too. And hey, if you don't agree with us, that's half the fun of being a fan as well, is having a nice friendly debate. Not saying that we're always in the right and anyone else is always in the wrong or vice versa. It's always fun to have these kind of debates because people do think of building a team differently, and that's why you have so many different ways of doing it in the National Hockey League and so many different style of teams in the National Hockey League. It's a lot of fun. Robert, I saw on social media you did a little bit of it as well. I stayed away from the conversation. I saw a lot of people trying to grade Ryan Huska, and I know we did this in our episode a few episodes ago where we gave everyone a letter grade. But I kind of wanted to revisit the conversation a little bit because I found it fascinating how different people are viewing Huska halfway through this season here. What are your thoughts on Ryan Huska and the way that he's approached this season, given what he's been given as a roster and how he's handled that bench? Because we've seen him do a lot of different things this year that we didn't see last year. His approach has been very, very interesting this year for me, in the fact that you see these forward lines getting very similar ice times to one another, and that people are getting their ice times on the power play or the penalty kill. His approach seems to be he still really relies on his veteran players, but he still really enjoys playing the kids. He's not afraid to play Dustin Wolf over Dan Vladar in goal, which is the right call right now. What do you make of Ryan Huska overall in the job that he's done behind the Flames bench here?
I would say he's done a good job, especially when you consider the roster that he's been given. I mean, let's tell the truth here. I mean, this is not a good team. On paper, this is not a good hockey team. This is not a playoff team. Mm-hmm. And I think he's done a good job keeping them in the mix. And a lot of people say that Dustin Wolf is covering up for a lot of warts on this team, and I think they're absolutely right. There's that old saying, I'll show you a great coach and I'll show you a great goalie. It's definitely the case this year with the Calgary Flames and Huska. The thing I really like about Ryan is I think he's done a really good job rebuilding the culture after what it sounded like Daryl Sutter had really ruined it. Mm-hmm. It sounded like players did not want to play for the Calgary Flames. They did not want to play for Daryl Sutter. And I think they had a huge culture problem on their hands. And I think Ryan Huska has done a marvelous job at changing the culture and making it a place where guys actually want to play, want to come to the rink, want to block shots, want to fight and stand up for each other. I think he's done a good job with that. And the thing I like about him is he's very thoughtful. He's very even keeled. He doesn't get too high. He doesn't get too low. He doesn't snap on guys. But he's still tough. And I like the way he uses ice time to reward guys who are going and take away ice time from guys who are not. There's a lot of coaches that won't do that, but Huska does it. So there's a lot of aspects of the job that I've liked from Ryan so far. And the things that I haven't really liked are pretty small in the grand scheme of things. Like the fact he continues to go back to Kevin Rooney and Walker Duehr on the fourth line, I think is mind-boggling. I don't understand it. But in the grand scheme of things, it's a fourth line. It's not the biggest deal in the world, despite the fact that the Flames, they do need their fourth line going because they're so thin up front. So like there's that. Outside of like that, there's not too many roster decisions where I'm puzzled. I mean, another one could be Martin Pospisil. I don't think he should be on the top line with Kadri and Huberdeau anymore. I'd rather see him on the fourth line at center. So like there's like smaller roster decisions that I haven't liked necessarily, but I think in the grand scheme, I do think he's done a really nice job so far on a team that needed to rebuild the culture, on a team that's in a transition period. And, there was a lot in the air for the Calgary Flames when they hired him, and he got handed a shit sandwich. And I think he's done a really good job kind of fixing it and building a new culture for this team. So I'm a fan of the guy. I like him. That's kind of how I view it. If you had to give a letter grade, what do you think you would give him this season?
He's getting a B+ for me because you mentioned it. He's been given a roster that on paper should be giving the Flames a top 10 pick. That's just how it's built. And what he's done with this roster, like you mentioned a couple times there, the culture has been changed. He's been able to fix whatever issues were there before. And it shows based on one thing. One thing when I always talk about Calgary Flames with people online or in my personal life here is the same word keeps coming up is this team competes. The compete word keeps coming up. You can never fault the Flames' effort in these games. They're always working and they're always competing. Now, they may get outskilled on some nights. We saw that. We've seen that plenty this year. They just don't have the skill that some other teams do, but they're always competing. And for me, when you have a team that works hard and competes, that's always a reflection of their coach. That means the coach has the room. That means the coach's message is getting through. That means these players believe in what the coach is telling them and preaching to them, and they're paying that back by showing it on the ice. So I think the results, if you're looking at just wins and losses, of course you're going to want more wins. But at the same time, you look at what he's done with this group where you have these players pulling in the same direction. Now they're not scoring goals. That's not on Ryan Huska. That's on the roster build. Their PK is not the greatest, but again, that might be more roster build than actually on ice performance. But you look at what he's done with rewarding these kids with playing time. Connor Zeri's getting a lot of minutes when he's healthy. You saw Rory Kerins getting third line minutes when he was inserted into the lineup. Jacob Pelche's flourishing a little bit here. Matt Coronado has been a godsend for this team. You look at the young defenseman and Kevin Ball just getting rolled out as a first pairing defenseman a lot. So he rewards these guys for working hard. And it's great to see, and it's good to see that Ryan Huska has this group playing really, really hard, and that's what you want from your coach. So I give him a B+ there because I like the work that he's done behind the bench here. So it's really good conversation on Ryan Huska overall there. Did you give him a letter grade? I think I might have missed it.
On Twitter, I think I gave him a B.
A B. That's what I thought. Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Last topic on today's episode is one that I would love to talk about with you as well, because we both were excited to see this guy get called up. We both were excited to see this guy worked in the lineup. And really what we told our expectations were just earn a second game. Well, the guy's played 4 games. He's got 4 points. He looks good. He looks poised. He fits right in with what the Flames are doing. He falls right in line with Ryan Huska's preaching on the bench. Rory Kerins has really taken the beginning of his NHL career and run with it. Overall, I've really enjoyed with what this guy has brought to the Flames lineup. He's played with a couple different guys here. He really got Jacob Pelche going in his first game when he played with the Blackhawks. What have you made of Rory Kerins, and how excited are you now to continue to watch this guy's development?
Yeah, I mean, first off, the NHL debut was spectacular. I don't know if I've ever seen a guy pick up 2 assists in like his first 4 shifts. Like that was absolutely incredible, and to see the team's reaction to him picking up those points was super cool, and it's been great. And when you and I talked about when Kerins initially got called up, I think both you and I had fairly low expectations. I mean, this is a guy that was in the ECHL a couple years ago, didn't get preseason game, was completely overlooked in this team. So just the fact that he even got to the NHL was extremely impressive. And I think when you and I were discussing it, we both said, like, he's not the flashiest player. He's more of a quiet guy, but he's very smart. He's got good hands, good vision, and he's got some really good offensive instincts. And I think we've seen exactly that from him so far. Like when I've watched Rory Kerins, he has not like jumped off the page to me, and he's not blinded anybody with speed or like an incredible shot or anything like that. But it's just like he sets up his teammates in better positions than they were before. He makes really smart plays, smart passes. Like I really like the way he's playing, and he's shown some chemistry with Jacob Pelche and Yegor Sharangovich. He's looked pretty good on that second power play unit, and this is a major win for the Calgary Flames because they desperately needed somebody to come up and start producing some points for them because they can't score goals right now, as we all know. So to have Rory Kerins come up and produce 4 points in 4 games is awesome. And at the same time, I really hope it opens up Conroy and Huska's mind to maybe adding another young player or two to the lineup. And the guy I look at is, could you add maybe a William Stromgren to this team and readjust your lines and figure out a way to make a brand new 4th line and get Stromgren and Kerins into the top 9? I wonder if that's something that they're considering here over the next month or two. So overall, it's been very positive from Rory Kerins. I've really liked what I've seen, and man, it would be huge for this team if he could turn into a top 9 NHL forward. I believe he's a 6th round pick. Like that would be phenomenal. A huge win for this team if that could happen.
He's brought a lot of high energy to the lineup as well. He's done a really good job for the Flames. I do like the idea of the Stromgren as well. The way that Rory Kerins has played, Robert, has that changed your expectations of the player? Or is it still, hey, just keep going and doing what you're doing here, status quo?
I expect Rory Kerins to be a point-per-game player moving forward. I mean, he's done in 4 games. Why can't he do it for the rest of the year? I say that kind of sarcastically. Exactly, yeah. No, I'd say expectations are the same. It's pretty low. It's come in here and, like you said, continue to earn that next game. Make it impossible for Ryan Huska to take you out of the Flames lineup. I think that should be his goal. And if points and goal scoring and production comes from that, that's fantastic. If he does take a step back, that's okay too. He's a super young player and he's still developing. He is not a finished product by any stretch of the imagination. So just keep doing what you're doing, kid. Keep crushing it. Keep working hard. And man, it would be great it'd be a great story to see if he could stick with this team.
Flames have 5 days off before they do 3 games in 4 nights. We'll see how Rory Kerins and the rest of the team performs in those games. Looking forward to it this week. We'll see how they display the goaltending. I'm sure that'll be a nice big discussion across Twitter and other social media outlets as well. Looking forward to seeing how they play against Buffalo and Minnesota. Some good teams coming up for the Flames as well. Robert, what's coming up from you on flamesnation.ca? Where can the folks find you?
Yeah, just find me on Twitter at Ring of Fire CGY and at flamesnation.ca. I've written a whole bunch of articles over the last couple weeks, so go check those out. And planning on doing a couple more this week, and lots of fun, interesting stuff going on the website.
And I'm Vintage Johnny 84 across social media platforms. Find the show, as always, Red Mile Rundown as well. Thank you so much for your support on the downloads and the listens. Don't forget to smash that 5-star rating and review button as well. And in the comments, let us know what you think about these conversations today. We'll see you next week on the Red Mile Rundown.